call it. Heads. Never try to be unlike other people. Only strive to be more and more like yourself. Hello, and welcome to Storytime with Isto. You've reached chapter 17 of Tarot Tales, a weekly gathering where I tell a little-known fairy tale based on a randomly drawn tarot card from the week prior. Those of you that were with me last week know that I drew the Hanged Man last week, which is this beautiful yet haunting card that seems as though it might portend something a lot darker than it actually does. There's this belief that this character, despite being hung upside down, and being called the Hanged Man for that matter, is looking very serene. It's got this halo around it. And so the connotations attached to the meaning of this card are that you are kind of caught upside down in a tricky situation. And this card is kind of like inviting you to sit back, relax, and try and ease into the discomfort of your current situation, to reflect on where you are, how you got there, and how you want to change. Likewise, if we do the opposite, it's the idea that you're not listening to the fact that you maybe need to slow down, take stock, and reflect. And so I really resonate with this card when it's reversed, actually. Pushing yourself beyond the bounds of where you can be, trying to do things simply because you want change rather than actually needing change, and just generally being impatient with the idea of that long form reflection and taking stock. I think in either sense, it works pretty well for our story this evening. But before we dive into that, let's talk about our cocktails for the week. For alcohol drinkers, we have a drink called the Gepetto, which is like a really nice spin on an Italian cocktail, Cynar Amaro Montenegro. I would love to try it at some point. I also have found it a little challenging to find these ingredients this week. And for the voices in this show, I wanted something a little lighter, so I'm going with the Figaro, which is this gorgeous mocktail, I should say here, that is like muddled mint and figs with some ginger ale. So I hope some of you are enjoying this in the future or with me now. Regardless, simply for joining me in whatever plane of consciousness we call this connection between me in the past and you in the present. Thank you for joining me. Cheers. Oh, that is quite delicious, actually. Wanted to try that live. Was terrified. All right, well, let's dive in. We've got a 200-page story to get through this evening, which we have cut down substantially, and it should be nice and snappy. Before we dive into it, though, I do want to ask, as I continue to try and grow this art project, the two things that you can do to help me out the most would be to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel on this device and any device that you have access to. Thank you very much. And with that, let us dive in to Chapter 17, The Hanged Man and Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. There was, once upon a time, a piece of wood in the shop of a carpenter named Master Cherry. Master Cherry, or Master Antonio, was so called because his nose would grow very red when he got nervous or excited. Hence the name Master Cherry. Oh, this wood has come at the right moment. It might do well as the leg of a nice table. And taking up the axe, he struck a tremendous blow on the piece of wood. Oh, you have hurt me, cried a little voice dolefully. Master Cherry was petrified. His eyes started right out of his head with fright. Oh, where on earth can that little voice have come from? Is it possible that this piece of wood could have learned to cry and lament like a child? Can anyone be hidden inside of it? Oh, if so, I will settle him at once. And so saying, he seized the poor piece of wood and commenced beating it about against the walls of the room with very little mercy. Then he stopped to hear if there were any voices remaining in the room. He waited for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and still nothing. And he said to himself, "Oh, I see how it is," forcing himself to laugh. "That little voice was all in my imagination. Let us set to work again." And putting the axe aside, he took up his plane to the wood. I don't know if you've ever seen a plane, but if you've ever peeled a lemon or peeled an orange or something, it's like that, but with wood. It gets those nice long scrapes. Took his plane to the piece of wood, but whilst he was running it up and down, he heard the same little voice laughing, saying, "Oh, stop here tickling me! Hoo, 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 hoo." This time, poor Master Cherry fell down as if he had been struck by lightning. When at last he opened his eyes, he found himself seated on the floor. Before he could gather himself to investigate, there came a knock at the door. "Oh, come in," said the carpenter. A very lively old man immediately stepped into the shop. His name was Gepetto. But the boys of the neighborhood, when they wished to make him angry, they called him Pudding, because his yellow wig greatly resembled a pudding made of corn. Gepetto was a very fiery old man. Woe to him that called him Pudding. "Good day, Master Antonio." "Oh, what has brought you to me, neighbor Gepetto?" "I come to ask a favor of you. This morning I had an idea come into my head. I thought I would make a beautiful wooden puppet, one that could dance and fence and leap like an acrobat. With this puppet I would travel the world to earn a piece of bread and a glass of wine. What do you think?" "Oh, bravo, Pudding!" exclaimed the same little voice, but it was impossible to say where it was coming from. Hearing himself called Pudding, Gepetto became as red as a turkey cock from rage, and he said in a fury, "Oh, why do you insult me and call me Pudding? Oh, it was not I. Do you think that I call myself Pudding? It was you, I say. No, yes, no, yes." And the two men went back and forth like this, becoming more and more angry with words. They soon came to blows and were flying at each other. They bit and fought and scratched. And when the fight was over, Master Cherry was in possession of Gepetto's disgusting yellow wig. And Gepetto discovered that the gray wig of Master Antonio the carpenter remained between his teeth. "Oh, give me back my wig," screamed Master Cherry, "and you return me mine and let us be friends again." The two men shook hands, and then Mr. Cherry said, "Well then, neighbor Gepetto," trying to prove that the peace had been fully made, "what is it the favor that you wish of me?" "I want a little wood to make a puppet. Will you give me some?" Master Cherry was delighted, and he immediately went to the bench and fetched the piece of wood that had caused him so much fear. As soon as he reached home, Gepetto took his tools and set out to work to cut out and model his puppet. "Oh, I think I will call him Pinocchio. It is a name that will bring him luck. I once knew a whole family so called. There was Pinocchio the father, Pinocchia the mother, and then Pinocchii the children, and all of them did well." Having found a name for his puppet, he began to go to work in good earnest. The mouth was not even complete when it started to laugh and deride him. "Oh, who do you think you are, Pudding?" "Oh, stop laughing," Gepetto rolled in a threatening voice. The mouth then ceased laughing, but stuck out its tongue as far as it would go. When Gepetto had finished the feat, he received a swift kick on the point of his nose, and Pinocchio began to walk by himself and run about the room until, having gone out of the house door, he jumped into the street and escaped. "Oh, stop him!" shouted Geppetto. But the people in the street, seeing a wooden puppet running, stood still in astonishment to look at it, and laughed and laughed. "Poor puppet," said people. "He is right not to wish to return home. Who knows how Geppetto, that bad old man, will beat him?" Others added, "Yeah, Geppetto seems like a good man, but with boys he's a regular tyrant. If that poor puppet is left in his hands, he is quite capable of tearing him in pieces." And they proceeded on in such force that eventually a soldier came and led Geppetto away to jail. The puppet returned home and found the street door ajar. He went in, and having fastened the latch, threw himself on the floor and gave a great sigh of satisfaction. But soon he heard someone in the room that was saying, "Reh, reh, reh." "Who calls me?" said Pinocchio in fright. "It is I." Pinocchio turned round and saw a big cricket slowly climbing its way up the wall. "Tell me, cricket, who might you be?" "I am the talking cricket, and I have lived in this room 100 years or more." "Now, however, this room is mine," said the puppet. "Go away at once." "I will not go until I have told you a great truth. Woe to those boys who rebel against their parents. They will never come to any good in the world." "Sing away, cricket. I have made up my mind to run away tomorrow at daybreak, because if I remain, I shall be sent to school to me to study, and I have no wish to learn." "In that way you will grow up a donkey, and everyone will make fun of you." "Hold your tongue, you wicked, ill-omened croaker!" shouted Pinocchio. "Poor Pinocchio, I really pity you and your wooden hand." At these words, Pinocchio jumped up in a rage, and snatching the wooden hammer from the bench, threw it at the talking cricket. Perhaps he never meant to hit him, but unfortunately, it struck him exactly on his head, so that the poor cricket had scarcely time to breathe a final "ree, ree, ree," and then he dried up and flattened dead against the wall. It was not long before Pinocchio grew starving without Geppetto's care, so he went out to food to beg, but got caught in the rain. He returned home wet like a chicken, exhausted with fatigue and hunger, and having no longer strength to stand, he sat down and rested his damp and muddy feet on the brazier full of burning embers. Brazier was a new word for me. It's just like a space heater, but it has live coals in it. As he fell asleep, and whilst he slept, his feet took fire, for he was a puppet, a marionette. Which brings us to our first vocab word, as Pinocchio is burning alive. Fun new events in this story, isn't it? So, most of you have probably heard of a marionette. A marionette's just a puppet, a wooden puppet. But fun fact about me, I spent a lot of my childhood between the marionette camp and the drama camp of the Richardson Parks and Recreation Department. And one of the things that I used to do is I would go from park to park with my marionette camp, and we would perform little puppet shows for the neighborhood children. And so as I kind of dove into this, I had like a personal awakening when I realized that I was kind of doing these tiny little puppet shows here. Anyway, and so I've got some fun puppet facts for you that I was really drawn to this week. So, not a whole lot, but marionette is actually the French for Little Mary, because, as with most theatrical organizations, most shows had a religious context. And the very first marionette was likely in a religious show, and the very first marionette was a version of the Virgin Mary. But we have found puppets in various different places all across the world. There are wood figurines that have been found in Egypt in as early as 2000 BC, and also in ancient Greece and Rome with ivory dolls around 500 BC that would move independently. And so, in many ways, marionettes were like an early first form of theater in trying to recreate this human life. All right, back to the burning corpse of our beloved Disney hero. And his feet burnt away and became cinders. At last, at about daybreak, he awoke to someone knocking on the door. "Who's there?" he asked, yawning and rubbing his eyes. He can't stand right now. "Oh, it is I," answered Gepetto. "My little Pinocchio, how did you manage to burn your feet?" Pinocchio wept and explained his interaction with the cricket, his starvation, and his footlessness. Geppetto comforted him, fed him his only remaining pears, and promised to build him new feet if he was a good boy and agreed to go to school. You could break that down psychologically in a number of different ways. But my favorite thing about this is that even though I cut a large amount of this story, Geppetto, there's never an explanation for how Geppetto gets out of jail, nor really for why he goes. Unexplained. "Oh, but if I'm going to go to school, I'm without the most important thing. I have no spelling book." "Well, patience," exclaimed Geppetto, all at once rising to his feet, putting on his old corduroy coat, patched and darned, and he ran out of the house. He returned shortly, holding in his hand a spelling book for Pinocchio. But the old coat was gone. The poor man was in his shirt sleeves, and out of doors it was snowing. Pinocchio was unable to restrain the impulse of his good heart. He sprung up, threw his arms around Geppetto, and kissed him again and again. As soon as it stopped snowing, Pinocchio set out for school with his fine spelling book under his arm. But as he walked around the town, he heard the sounds of fifes, and he followed the sound till he found himself in the middle of a square quite full of people who were all crowded around a building made of wood and canvas and painted 1,000 colors. Above it, a sign read, "The Great Puppet Theater." On stage, Harlequin and Punch were, as usual, quarreling with one another and threatening each other at every moment to come to blows. All right, so our final fun fact is also very puppet based. So you have probably heard the name Harley Quinn before from Batman, I'm guessing. And the real kind of correlation that's going on there is that she is kind of like the sly backup to the Joker in those stories, and she's wearing this kind of checkered clothing patterns, and that's very similar to the patterns that still exist for Harlequin. So Harlequin itself is from Commedia dell'arte and is otherwise known as like these Zani characters. And so these various Zani existed from Commedia dell'arte. This is also where we get the name Zany. And there were two types of Zani characters. There was the kind of silly servant, and then the other one being the cunning servant. And the cunning servant grew to become the Harlequin. Now, over time, the Harlequin character became paired more and more with a clown. And so that's why the Batman pair of like the clown, the Joker, and Harlequin is actually kind of brilliant, unfortunately, and also wonderfully. The Harlequin itself is this kind of like nimble, astute servant in a number of different ways that thwarts the plan of their master and pursues their own love interest and inherits like physical agility and trickster qualities from like a devil character in the medieval passion plays. Now, Harlequin is one of the characters that was just listed. The other character that is listed is Punch. Now, Punch is from something that you may have seen more in popular culture, which is these kind of like two puppets, one of which that like knocks the other one on the head. And this is actually, unfortunately, husband-wife duo. We've got Punch, the punching one, and Judy, formerly Joan, and they quarrel and whatnot. Punch is this kind of violent and cruel but funny clown-type character. Originally marionettes, they eventually stopped becoming marionettes, and they were more like gloved puppets. But Punch would make a very good counterfeit to Harlequin. I have no idea if it was common for these two to have a mashup, but fell down the rabbit hole, so thought I'd take you with me. All righty. All at once, Harlequin stopped short, and turning to the public, he pointed with his finger hand and exclaimed in a dramatic tone, "Gods of the firmament! Do I dream or am I awake? But surely that is Pinocchio!" "Oh, it is indeed Pinocchio!" cried Punch. "It is Pinocchio! It is Pinocchio!" shouted all the puppets in the chorus. "Pinocchio, come up here to me!" cried Harlequin, "and throw yourself into the arms of your wooden brothers." The other thing that I really love about this version is that it seems that all puppets are have the ability to speak and walk around of their own, and it's never explained. At this affectionate invitation, Pinocchio sprang upon the stage and embraced his brethren. At that moment, out came the showman, also known as the Fire Eater. He was very big and so ugly that the sight of him was enough to frighten anyone. He carried a large whip made of snakes and foxes' tails twisted together, which he cracked constantly. He was furious his show had been halted and commanded Pinocchio to be burnt alive for the distraction. But Pinocchio begged so strongly and courageously that the Fire Eater took pity on him and spared his life. I cut out a whole bunch of back and forth where this is just a very murderous character trying to burn all the puppets alive. Pinocchio saves all of them. It's a really fun character if you decide to read the book. Highly recommend it.
What is your father's name?
Gepetto!
And what trade does he follow?
Oh, he is a beggar. He has never had a penny in his pocket. Only think, in order to buy his only son a spelling book, he sold the only coat he had to wear in the middle of winter.
Oh, poor devil. I feel almost sorry for him. Here are 5 gold pieces. Go at once and take them to him with my compliments.
Pinocchio was overjoyed and thanked the showman 1,000 times. He embraced all the puppets of the company one by one and set out to return home. But he had not gone far when he met a cat and a fox on his return home. "Good day, Pinocchio," said the fox, greeting him politely. "How do you know my name?" asked the puppet. "Oh, I know your father well. I saw him yesterday at the door of your house. He was in his shirt sleeves and shivering with cold." "Oh, poor papa! Oh, but that's over. For the future he shall shiver no more." "Why?" "Well, because I've become a gentleman. Look at these 5 gold pieces." And he pulled out the money that the Fire Eater had given him. "Would you like to make out of your 5 miserable sovereigns 2,000?" said the fox. "Oh, well, I should think so. But in what way?" "Oh, the way is easy enough. Instead of returning home, you must go with us to the land of the owls, where there's a sacred field called the Field of Miracles. In this field, you will dig a little hole in the middle of night, and in it you will put 1 gold sovereign. You water it with 2 pails of water, sprinkle it with 2 pinches of salt, and go quietly to bed. And in the night, the gold pieces will grow and flower, and in the morning you will find a beautiful tree laden with an increase of 500 golden sovereigns." "Oh, how delightful!" cried Pinocchio, dancing for joy. "As soon as ever I have obtained these sovereigns, I will give you a present." "A present to us?" cried the fox with indignation and appearing much offended. "We do not work," said the fox, "for interest. We work solely to enrich others." "What good people!" thought Pinocchio to himself, and forgetting then and there his papa, the new coat he was going to buy him, the spelling book he was returning home with, and all his good resolutions from the puppet theater, he said to the fox and the cat, "Oh, let us be off. I will go with you." That evening, they took lodge at the Inn of the Red Crawfish. No sooner had Pinocchio fallen asleep than he was suddenly awakened by 3 violent blows on the door of his room. It was the innkeeper who had come to tell him that midnight had struck and his companions were waiting for him at the Field of Miracles. They had left Pinocchio to pay the bill. Pinocchio gave the innkeeper a sovereign for their sleep and supper and left. Outside the inn, it was so pitch dark that he had to grope his way around him, for it was impossible to see a hand's breadth in front of him. As he was walking along, he saw a little insect shining dimly on the trunk of a tree. "Who are you?" asked Pinocchio.
"I am the ghost of the talking cricket,"
answered the insect in a low voice.
"I have come to give you more advice. Go back and take the 4 sovereigns that you have left to your poor father. He is weeping and in despair because you have not returned to him. Don't trust those who promise to make you rich in a day. They are either mad or rogues. Give ear to me and go back, my boy."
"I am determined to go on. Always the same stories. Good night, Cricket."
"Good night, Pinocchio, and may heaven preserve you and protect you from assassins."
"Really?" "Really?"
said the puppet to himself as he resumed his journey.
"How unfortunate we poor boys are. Everybody scolds us and gives us advice. See now, because I don't choose to listen to that tiresome Cricket, who knows, according to him, how many misfortunes are to happen to me. I am even to meet with a
But Pinocchio had no time to finish, for at that moment he turned to see 2 evil-looking black figures enveloped in charcoal sacks running after him. But knowing not where to hide his gold pieces, he put them under his tongue and tried to escape. But he felt himself seized by the arm and heard 2 horrid voices saying to him,
Your money or your life."
Pinocchio, not being able to answer in words, owing to that the money was in his mouth, made 1,000 pantomimes. He tried to make the 2 figures understand that he was but a poor puppet.
"Come now, less nonsense or you are dead,"
said the tallest of the brigands.
"And after we have killed you, we will also kill your father."
"Oh, no, not my poor papa,"
cried Pinocchio in a despairing voice, and as he said it, the sovereigns clinked about in his mouth.
"Ah, you rascal, you have hidden your money under your tongue. Spit it out at once."
Then the shorter assassin drew out an ugly knife and tried to put it between the lips of the puppet. But Pinocchio, quick as lightning, caught his hand with his teeth and with one bite bit it clear off and spat it out. Imagine his astonishment when instead of a hand, he perceived that of a cat's paw laying on the ground. As the cat screamed in pain, Pinocchio escaped, jumping the hedge by the roadside and flying across the country towards a small house as white as snow that he saw in the distance.
"Oh, if only I could reach that house, I would be safe,"
he said to himself. It was a very hard walk for him. At last, after a desperate race of nearly 2 hours, he arrived, quite breathless, at the door of the house and knocked once again. The window opened, and a beautiful child appeared at it. She had blue hair and a face as white as a waxen image. Her eyes were closed, and her hands were crossed on her breast. Without moving her lips in the least, she said in a voice that seemed to come from the other world, "In this house there are no people. Everyone here is dead."
"Oh, then at least open the door for me yourself," cried Pinocchio.
"I am dead also. I am waiting for the beer to come and take me away." Having said this, she immediately disappeared, and the window was closed again without the slightest noise.
Oh, beautiful child, please open the door for pity's sake. Have compassion.
But before he could speak another word, he was seized by the charcoal figures, and, drawing out 2 horrid knives, clash, they attempted to stab him twice. But the puppet, luckily for him, was made of very hard wood, and the knives broke into 1,000 pieces, and the assassins were left with the handles in their hands, staring at each other.
I see what we must do, said one of them. He must be hung. We must hang him.
And without loss of time, they tied his arms behind him, passed a noose around his throat, and hung him to the branch of a big oak tree. Then they sat down on the grass and waited for his last struggle. But at the end of 3 hours' time, the puppet's eyes were still open, his mouth closed, and he was kicking more than ever. Losing patience, the figure said,
Goodbye until tomorrow. We hope that when we return you will be polite enough to allow yourself to be found quite dead and with your mouth wide open.
And they walked off. In the meantime, a tempestuous northerly wind began to blow and roar angrily, and it beat the poor puppet from side to side, making him swing violently like the clattering of a bell ringing for a wedding. And the swinging gave him atrocious spasms, and the noose became still tighter around his throat. Little by little, his eyes began to grow dim, and as he felt that death was near, he remembered his poor father. And with his dying breath, he stammered out,
Oh, Papa, Papa, if only you were here.
And then his breath failed him, and he could say no more. He shut his eyes, opened his mouth, stretched his legs, gave a long shudder, and hung stiff and insensible. The end. Or rather, the middle. This is a summary. This has been a summary of chapters 1 through 15 of 36 of the original Pinocchio. I tried to condense all of the really fucked up stuff that didn't make it into the Disney version into this story. One fun fact about the Disney movie is that apparently the 1940 Disney version had basically the same kind of really shitty personality for Pinocchio. And so he changed it because he wanted audiences to like him, which was apparently very effective because it's still one of their most popular Disney movies. So you would think more people would know these backstories than that there is this hanging in here, which is also just so apropos for this card. Some more fun stuff that we just didn't have time to get into. First and foremost, yeah, we've got this. You know, this dead little ghost girl. Turns out she is the blue fairy. She comes in and she saves Pinocchio from that tree. And then he moves in with her, forgetting Gepetto, even though she's trying to teach him how to be a better person in general. Then he runs away again, and she leaves up a sign indicating that she has died from grief when he left. He comes back and he mourns her so very much that she comes forward and expresses to him that she was really just testing him to see if he really did care for her. She is like the moral center of this entire section. Yada, yada, yada. He moves off, go to the land of boobies. A fisherman tries to fry him. He becomes a donkey. Somebody owns him as a donkey and tries to drown the donkey so that they can get the skin from the donkey. Swallowed by not a whale, but something called a dogfish, which is where he finds Gepetto, and then eventually is able to give Gepetto back his coat, the coat that he sold for Pinocchio to go to school, and Pinocchio finally goes to school as a real boy, which is just such a fun moral play. And the other thing that's just so fascinating about this is that Carlo Collodi, who wrote this whole story, this like bonkers story, which I feel like we don't get enough of, this fun like moral children's story, he like wrote a whole bunch of political stuff until he got so disillusioned with politics that he was like, fuck it, I'm just writing children's stories. And so then he wrote this. Isn't that amazing? Oh, Well, I hope you think so. I certainly do. My gratitude this week, I was just having such a fun little nostalgia moment thinking about how all of this ties back to my marionette roots. So you're never going to see this, but Victoria, Laura, Jamie, Abby, Michelle, Xander, and everybody else that I did marionette camp with, I miss you. Thank you for being a formative part of my childhood. Next week, we have one of my favorite cards, which is the Hermit, which this camera actually doesn't do it justice because it's got this like beautiful teal right here. And I've got a fantastic story for you that's very fitting for it from Australia, which will be our first one from that continent. So stay tuned. I'll see you next week. And with that, may you be happy. May you be healthy. May you treat yourself with love and respect. May you continue to grow and find the strength to persevere through the painful parts of growth. May you find inspiration all around you. And may you find peace. Thank you for joining me this week. Until next week. Bye, y'all.